All right, in this explainer, we're going to untangle a really complex story unfolding in Europe right now. It's about how three big things are connected: the economy, which is all about the money in your pocket, politics, which is about the leaders you choose, and the people, specifically the social tensions that are bubbling up just beneath the surface. So, let's get into it. So, you might be looking at the headlines and thinking, okay, is this whole crisis in Europe just about money? A financial problem? Or is there something deeper going on? Is that economic pain just the first domino to fall in a much, much bigger chain reaction? That's what we're here to find out.
Okay, so to really get a grip on what's happening, we've got to look at it from three different angles. Think of it like three sides of the same story. Each one is a piece of the puzzle, and you'll see how they all lock together.
So first up, we'll dive into the economic crisis itself. Then we'll look at the political fallout from all that. And finally, we'll explore the very real effect this has on immigrant communities. Let's go.
All right, first things first. Let's talk about the economy. This is really the root of the problem, this economic squeeze that people are feeling in their everyday lives right across Europe.
So what's really driving this? Well, it boils down to three main things. You've got inflation and unemployment, which means prices are going up while jobs are getting harder to find. Then you have super slow economic growth. The whole system's just kind of sluggish. And on top of all that, some countries are buried under a massive pile of debt.
And if you're looking for a trigger, a major one was the huge spike in energy prices. I mean, it was a massive shock to the system. And it wasn't just about paying more to fill up your car. Oh no, that cost rippled through everything, making pretty much everything else more expensive too. And that right there is inflation in a nutshell. It's a pretty simple idea, right? But its impact is huge. Basically, the money in your wallet just doesn't stretch as far as it did last year. And for families, that means making some really tough calls. At the supermarket, when paying bills, it adds up.
Then you've got this other huge problem: national debt. We're talking about a massive, massive weight on the shoulders of some countries, like Italy and Greece. They are struggling with these enormous financial burdens. And here's the thing, that's not just their problem. It's a potential crack in the foundation of the entire European economy. Okay, so when people are feeling the pinch financially, it never just stays an economic issue, right? It always, always spills over into politics. And this is where things start to get really complicated and honestly, a lot more serious. You can see the chain reaction laid out right here. It's a predictable but really powerful sequence. First, you get the economic hardship. People are struggling. Then that struggle turns into anger, a real widespread frustration with the system. And what happens next? That anger creates a perfect opening for nationalist parties to rise up. And a classic move for these parties? They tap into that anger by creating a simple story, a simple villain. They often campaign on these anti-immigrant platforms, basically pointing the finger and blaming outsiders for what are actually really complex economic issues. It's a powerful and, unfortunately, often effective tactic. And this really gets to the heart of the tension in Europe today. You have this big idea, this dream of European unity, of everyone working together for a common goal. But then there's the reality. And the reality is, when times get tough, countries start looking out for number one, prioritizing their own national interests above all else. Of course, all this financial pressure forces governments to make some pretty painful choices. To balance the books, they have to start cutting back. And what gets cut? Well, often it's the public services that people depend on most. We're talking healthcare, education, social programs. And while those cuts affect everybody, they hit the most vulnerable people the hardest. So that brings us to the human cost of all this. We've talked about the economy and the politics, but who really feels the squeeze when these forces collide? As is so often the case, the pressure lands squarely on one of the most vulnerable groups in society, the immigrant population. You see, for immigrants, it's like being caught in a perfect storm. The pressure is coming from all sides. On a government level, you see stricter asylum policies. On an economic level, there are way fewer job opportunities. And on a social level, there's this growing tension and hostility. And remember that political fallout we talked about? Well, here's a direct result. To appeal to angry voters, some governments are making it much, much more difficult for people to seek asylum. They're throwing up red tape to slow the whole process down, and they're tightening up their borders. At the same time, the job market becomes a real flashpoint. I mean, it makes sense, right? When the economy is struggling and there aren't enough jobs to go around, the priority often becomes giving those jobs to local citizens. That, of course, leaves immigrants with very few options. And here's the really sad part. When you have this competition for scarce resources, whether it's jobs, housing, or social services, it can really fuel social tension. It can create an us versus them mentality, building mistrust between local and immigrant communities, and making it so much harder for people to just live together. So if there's one thing you take away from all this, let it be this. None of these things are happening in a vacuum. You absolutely cannot look at the economic problem without seeing the political fallout, and you can't understand the politics without seeing the impact on people. They aren't three separate issues. They are three parts of one single interconnected crisis. It really is like a cascade, a domino effect. It started with money problems, right? But that first domino knocked over the next one, politics. And that political domino is now knocking over the social one, putting a huge amount of strain on the very fabric of European society. And all of this leaves us with a huge, and honestly, a really critical question for the future. As Europe faces this tangled web of challenges, which way is it going to go? Will these pressures pull it apart, leading to more division? Or could this crisis somehow lead to a new sense of unity? We don't know the answer yet, but it's a story that's still being written.